Hello and welcome. Our topic today is anti-oppression social work practice. It's also in your modules as topic 5, I think. The objectives for this topic is to look at your understanding of human rights principles and discourse and how they can be incorporated into social work, and improve our understanding on what anti-oppressive social work practice means and how we can link human rights and social work practice. So we are moving now from the abstract of human rights to how we apply that in social work. And we start with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states very clearly that all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law, or are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. That's very consistent with our social work principles, where we respect everyone and we feel that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and of equal value irrespective of their status in this world. Now, that is the theory. In practice, however, we find that there is a gap between that ideal and the reality. We would like everyone to be protected from any kind of discrimination and to be treated fairly. Not everyone gets treated like that. Historically, we have had people discriminated on various bases, whether it's gender or class or location or culture, and that has continued up to this day. It might be less. We don't have, in most places, actual slavery. We don't have colonialism in its raw state as we have had in the past. So we have made some progress. But that doesn't mean that we still don't have a lot of oppression. We still have, like in areas occupied by ISIS, we still have people being taken as slaves. We do have many places in the world where women are treated as second class, where we have workers being exploited very badly, minorities being treated as almost subhuman. So this issue is as real today as it has been over other epochs or periods of history. It's just that we have made some progress, and at least we have the human rights that try to point in this direction. So, and that is the ideal. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that is not necessarily the reality for most people in the world today. One of my heroes, or heroines if you like, is the late Professor Wangari Maathai, who won a Nobel Prize for Peace, and she has argued that for the colonized people, the biggest problem is the issue of self-knowledge, because that is destroyed by colonialism, where they are made to be ashamed of themselves and aspire to be like their colonizer, who seems to have everything, the power, the wealth, and the history. So the colonized people then tend to have a low esteem and low regard of themselves because they are not as privileged as their oppressor. And what Professor Mandai has argued is that even after colonialism is formally ended, that problem continues. People still continue with that problem of poor self-knowledge, self-appreciation. You can pause and try to consider what has been happening with the indigenous people here in Australia, people who have a proud past and a proud culture, but are now marginalized and may not have as much pride and self-knowledge as they might have once had. Now, there has been a number of theories that try to explain some of these issues. They're generally grouped as the post theories in social work. One of them is postmodernism. It refers to the change in the thinking in a world that we are living now of uncertainty and unpredictability. But also tries to argue that the grand theories of the past don't necessarily explain everything because realities are different for different people, and not one theory can capture everything. And an attempt to have everything codified into one theory makes a risk of oppressing other people who may not fit in with that broad grand theory. In the 60s in France, they had what was called post-structuralism. Structuralists then seem to present human culture as a system of science, and that in general every system has a structure. Post-structuralism then was a critic of structuralism, and that's when we, structuralism is when you look at the world as being guided by structures. So then it's argued in post-structuralism that since history and culture condition the study of underlying structures, it is subject to biases and misinterpretation. So it rejects that rigid structural understanding of the world. Another theory that is in this category is post-colonialism. And this is a very broad and loose set of theoretical approaches that look at the aftermath of what is left behind by colonialism. And it argues that the damage that is done to people who are colonized continues even after colonialism, and that it affects future generations. So the trauma is carried on from one generation to another. And many studies have confirmed this. Say studies with the victims of Holocaust have shown that even the children of the victims of Holocaust, even when they have not been affected directly, they continue to feel the effect of the Holocaust. When it comes to the anti-oppressive theories in social work practice, we have some very leading theorists. Lina Dominelli was the first one to come up with the concept, and other people have continued to develop it since then. Neil Thompson has mainly talked about discrimination or anti-discrimination, and Bob Mullery, I don't know how you pronounce Mullery, has also continued to talk about that, as we shall see in a minute. Professor Karen Healy, who most of you probably know well, as she is the president of Australian Association of Social Work, and is an author that many of you are familiar with through her writing and social work books. And she describes anti-oppressive theories as part of the critical social work tradition. It's based on theories in sociological theories that like Marxism, feminism, and radical and structural theories. And she argues that the key foundation is the claim that macro social structures shape social relations at every level of our social life. Healy continues to argue that it's very important to recognize the multiple forms of oppression, such as race, class, gender, and also understand that all forms of oppression should be acknowledged as harmful. Obviously, I guess that's pretty obvious that anyone who is oppressed, whether it's because of their gender or their sexual orientation, will be harmed in some way. She also argues that oppression arises from unequal power across social division. So those who have the power oppress those without power. So those who are privileged oppress those who don't have or don't share in the privilege. Thompson, as I mentioned, has written about discrimination and how discrimination relates to oppression, and he argues that there's a clear and direct relationship in that discrimination is what causes oppression, and therefore, in order to address oppression, it's absolutely critical to address discrimination, because without addressing discrimination, then you are not going to have any impact on. Without addressing discrimination, you're not going to have an impact on oppression. Bob Mullery, as we mentioned, he is a Canadian social work academic who was around 2000, was also living and working here in Australia. And he argues that oppression is a second-class citizenship that is assigned to people, not on the basis of failure or lack of merit, but because of one's membership of a particular group. So this is an important theory about oppression, because it's arguing that people don't necessarily need to have done anything to be oppressed. Just by virtue of being of a particular social group, whether it's a particular gender or a particular ethnicity, or it could be a particular oppression, people can assign some particular attributes to that group, and through that oppress them or deny them access to various resources. So that is what then oppression is all about. Murray also goes on to argue that oppression tends to be located in three key places. Personal, that is, you as an individual may be a target, or it can be cultural, whereby it is the particular cultural practices that lead to oppression. It can also be structural, where the way the laws are set, the way the entitlement to resources are organized, oppresses or excludes some people. Now, he argues that these three levels don't exist in isolation. They are in a dynamic relationship with each other. The oppression at the personal level is reinforced by the cultural practices, and that may also be reinforced further by the structures or the institutions, whether it's institutions like the government, the church, the schools, any kind of institutions that you can imagine that have an impact on the way the society is structured. That's just a diagram presenting a diagrammatic representation of those three levels. But as I said again, it's a dynamic relationship. This is just a further presentation of that, and you can see where marginalization or stigmatization or invisibilization of particular groups of people are made invisible, can lead to different categories of discrimination, whether that is things like class, race, ethnicity, or gender, which then leads to forms of oppression such as classism, racism, xenophobia, and so forth. Looking more closely, you can think of different types of discrimination. An example here is stereotyping, where in cognitive psychology discusses this as a way of filtering information to help classify and therefore recognize things more easily. So people then are categorized in different types. The problem is that when these become rigid, they can then become stereotyped. People are seen in particular categories. And the thing is, then they can become quite resistant to change, because people think, oh yeah, people who are in this type are like this, and there's no way you can change them. They can become negative, and obviously then potentially oppressive. What's worse is that they become part of our worldview, and we don't even notice that we hold them. We assume that it's quite natural. That is repeated. Another form of discrimination is what is regarded as marginalization, and that is how particular groups of people become marginalized from the mainstream, and therefore they are excluded. We've got good examples of indigenous people around the world. People with disabilities sometimes can also become marginalized, and they get marginalized by institutions and structures that don't recognize their specific needs. Cowed and migrant people can be marginalized. For instance, with the language, if you are going to use a language that they don't understand, and you don't provide interpreters or translators, then clearly they are going to be marginalized. If their cultures are not taken to be as important and only particular cultures are promoted, then that can be a way of marginalizing them. More extreme examples can be found outside Australia, I guess. Say, for instance, if you take an example of Turkey, where they have been known to ban the use of, say, the language of the Kurds, who is a large minority but are discriminated. So by banning the use of their language, you are marginalizing them, and that then leads to people having to start forms of resistance to assert themselves and to claim to be recognized. The government might be arguing that they are promoting one language to unify the nation, but unification should not be achieved at the expense of marginalizing and discriminating one particular cultural group. Another form of discrimination is what has been described as invisibilization. Same as marginalization, but this particularly makes particular reference to how the language and imagery is used, say in the media and literature. Some groups are made to be invisible, or you don't see them. You don't see particular groups represented in, say, in the media, or even when you are, say, presenting a typical Australian male or bloke. You know, if you present that as blonde hair, blue eyes, sporting type with muscles and goes to the gym and the beach, then you are obviously making the others who don't fit into that stereotype then invisible. They are not supposed to be Australian males, even though they are Australian males in every other respect. And the same can be done in regards to, what's the typical Australian woman. Infantilization is when you treat someone as a child, particularly in aged care. It is common for elderly people to be treated as if they are their children. And I have been to an aged care facility where even the manager was saying quite openly, they are like children, they have to be treated like children. And that is absolutely terrible. Our cowed people have also experienced that, where because their English is poor, then people tend to speak to them as if they are children, as if they are intellectually underdeveloped, simply because their English is not good. And that is quite dehumanizing in itself. Welfareism, that is a tendency to regard certain groups of people as in need of welfare by virtue of being members of a certain group, say like single moms. It's a disempowering attitude because it doesn't allow people to be individuals. Different individuals have different needs and different abilities. So just because somebody is a coward or a disabled person, an indigenous person or a sole parent, does not necessarily mean that they are on welfare or need welfare. A very serious form of discrimination is dehumanization, which relates to all the other forms of discrimination that we have talked about. But this is at the extreme level where people are treated as things. You had, for instance, the crisis in Rwanda where the Hutus were describing the Tutsis as cockroaches. Now, when you describe someone as a cockroach, it automatically then means they are pests that need to be got rid of. And there is no moral obligation then to treat them as human beings. So a definition then of dehumanization would be a psychological process whereby one group view the other as less than human and thus not deserving of moral consideration. Then the automatic progression from there is that you get into a situation where human rights violations are acceptable, you have war crimes being committed, and in extreme cases you have genocide. The antidote or the remedy then for dehumanization is humanization efforts, developing empathy, establishment of personal relationships with the people who are dehumanized or who are marginalized, finding ways of resolving conflicts, and identifying our common goals and our shared humanity. Another form of discrimination is trivialization. This is where important issues or important topics are regarded as trivial. An example is an issue like gender equity. Some people might think or present it as a joke. They laugh it off. Any issue to do with the gender. If you are arguing for gender, then you are seen as as somebody pursuing a trivial issue, even though it is a major issue of concern. Now, what's the relationship then between privilege and oppression? Clearly, we tend to focus more on oppression, but we should at the same time focus on on privilege, because usually the people who are involved in oppression are people who are enjoying some privilege. Therefore, oppression needs to be seen as the other side of the coin. And Peggy McIntosh has done very good work where she has discussed what is called as the unpacking the knapsack of acknowledged white privileges. And she herself, as a white woman in America, has done some kind of mapping to look at all the privileges that she has compared to the non-white black people and others who don't have the same privileges. And there are things that unless you analyze them, you won't notice them. You won't notice that some people have to be very careful in the suburb where they live, because people might not want you to be in that particular suburb. She noticed things like the way the history is presented, that it represents her own vision of history, whereas the other people who are in the minorities would not have that as part of the history. Say, for instance, if you're in Australia, on the history of Captain Cook and all that, is very highly regarded. If you are not of, say, British background, you may not identify with that, and you might not even notice that other people are not identifying with that aspect of history. So she has a whole list of that experience as her own analysis of the privileges that she has just by virtue of being white. Bob Peace has taken on that and developed that argument further, and he argues that privilege should be seen as the other side of oppression, and argues that in critical theory that has tended not to be considered. People have a lot of focus on oppression and how oppression operates, but very rarely do they examine the privileges. He argues then that to address oppression, it's very important to address privilege or undo the privileges. The people who have got the privileges need to think of how they can share or give up some of the privileges. And he finds that those privileges are located in aspects like class, elitism, whiteness, the patriarchal privileges, and other less examined sides such as heterosexual and able-bodied privileges. The sort of things that you tend to take for granted. You don't notice that just by virtue of being able-bodied, you have a lot of privileges that people living with disabilities don't have. I think the issue of same-sex marriages highlights, for example, the privileges that heterosexual people have, and they don't have to fight for the right to get married. Dominelli, as I mentioned before, is a leading light in the work on social work and anti-oppressive practices. And she argues that for us as social workers to be effective in tackling oppression, it's important to be very aware of the policy environment in which we work. Issues like neoliberalism policies that privilege the market systems, and also the rising social exclusion due to neoliberalism, the rise in poverty, which is evidence of the dominance of the market and the abandonment of social good, which were issues that were considered very important in the past. Is there an alternative, or are we destined to be like that and continue developing that market system and marginalizing some people and oppressing others? It's part of nature and inevitable. Clearly, that is not the case, and we have examples even today that point to some possible alternatives. An example here is Medicare. Medicare is a universal cover, though it has been progressively undermined. The concept of Medicare is a cover for every single person in Australia. Is an example of how we can work towards equality. Australian Red Cross, the blood donor service, where people who have got some blood to spare can donate, and those who need blood can get it without having to pay a cent. And we take it for granted, but in some countries that's not the case. If you want blood, you have to pay. And if you donate blood, you don't actually donate, you can sell your blood to those who need it. And obviously, the poor will sell the blood to treat the white people who need it and can afford to buy it. And when those poor people need it, they can't afford to buy it, so they just have to die. Another example of an alternative system is the universal education access in Australia. I don't know how complete that is, but I think for most people they can get education if they need it. In other countries, you have to pay for your education, as people have to pay here who prefer to go to private schools. One of the frontiers of social development is the concept of universal basic income, where every person would get a basic income, even whether you are a millionaire or an unemployed person. The government would give you that basic income as your entitlement as a citizen. No country has got there yet, but a number of countries are trying it. Canada, Ontario, they are trying it. They've been trying it also in Norway. And the surprise one is Kenya. It's not being done by the government, but it's being done by some NGOs. They're trying to see what would happen if everybody in the village gets provided with an income, irrespective of how well off they are. Everybody gets that amount, and obviously it means a lot more to some than others. But it means that you have that basic to support you, so there's no need for you to be destitute. And they want to see, what happens. The argument has always been, people will lose the incentive to work and so forth. But they want to see, what are people going to do with that kind of money. So it's a very exciting area of social development. You can pause and think of other forms of operation that we have not covered here. So what we have here is just examples of different forms of operation, but it's not an exhaustive list. We have not looked at exploitation. That happens in different ways: gender, children. We've not looked at the issue of powerlessness. We haven't looked at cultural imperialism. We haven't looked at violence. We haven't looked at medicalization, where people can get a medical label and then they get locked in that box, and every aspect of their life is looked at from that. So you become like a disease, whereas there is a much more to you as a person. So if you want to read more You can look at Murray, challenging oppression, and in that he argues that oppression is remarkably stable and resistant to change once it's established, but it's not fixed, nor is it essential or natural condition. So, can human rights inform social work to address the issue of oppression? How could you use anti-oppressive social work practice as a social worker? These are some thoughts that you need to have and see how you can apply them in practice. If you want to understand more, some of the references that you can look at is Macintosh that we mentioned before. That's White Privileges, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. If you want to look at the issue of culture and self-knowledge, you can look at my article called Quimenya. I would also recommend Bob Peace's book, An Earned Advantage in a Divided World. It's one of the best books in discussing that issue of privilege. That's all we have for this topic. I welcome any discussion on our discussion forum. If you want to contact me directly to discuss any of the issues raised by this discussion, you're most welcome. Thank you very much.